Alors, je veux, Monsieur le Président, remercier ce soir les dirigeants du Forum des politiques publiques du Canada pour votre invitation à cet événement impressionnant. Le témoignage d'amitié et de respect que vous offrez aux anciens premiers ministres, nous tous, est hautement apprécié de la part de tout le monde et également par nos familles et nos amis qui sont avec nous ce soir. As I look over this great crowd, I have to tell you, I'd love to be Prime Minister again. The truth is, I miss the adulation. God, those supportive editorials every morning in the Toronto Star. Those magnificent words every day from the CBC. But you know, well, as you know, I also had a great relationship with the Ottawa Press Gallery. And so I really miss some of those off-the-record, private and confidential conversations. With some members of the gallery, like Peter C. Newman. I tell you, I must tell you, it would be interesting if you could hear some of the things I told him. But unfortunately for you, he agreed in writing never to repeat any of the contents. And so I can't tell you what was said, but I can tell you that Newman turned out to be pretty goddamn profane. Well, you know, I was flipping through my morning copy of the Globe and Mail of February 28, 1890. And wouldn't you know, I came across a report on the unveiling of Sir John A. Macdonald's prime ministerial portrait. The Globe reported that Sir John, and I quote, told his admiring followers that he was the father of responsible government in Canada, he was the joint father of Confederation, and that the peace, progress, and prosperity that Canada had known for a quarter of a century was wholly and entirely due to the Conservative Party, unquote. And some of you thought I was guilty of hyperbole? But then the Globe, in a tradition that has fortunately survived to this day, introduced some measure of balance into the report. They went on, quote, someone has said that the chief business of old men is to tell stories which nobody believes. And this is pretty much the case with Sir John A. The journalist went on, quote, anyone familiar with the history of Canada knows that Sir John was the opponent of every single measure of reform, and that he has held power by a set of the most rascally acts that ever disgraced the statutes of a free country, unquote. Gee, some things never change, eh? Look, I have to tell you, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, to see that Jean Chrétien is not here tonight, because I was looking for an opportunity to thank him. You know, after I retired, I went into complete and absolute hibernation for a decade. I didn't read a newspaper, I never watched TV, I didn't listen to radio, I didn't have a clue what was going on. So I want to thank Jean, even though he's not here, but I want to thank him anyway for getting rid of the GST. Jean, I'll tell you, when you said in the 1993 campaign that you were going to axe the tax, Jesus, I almost voted for you myself. I mean, how the hell would you like to have the GST as your legacy? Well, you know, there are a lot of historians here tonight, and I think that in the interests of accuracy in history, you should know the truth. The truth is that Michael Wilson he's a wonderful guy, principled, honest guy. But the truth of the matter is that he snuck the GST past me. One day in cabinet, while I was out there in cabinet pleading with the other ministers for more money for Katimovic. That's how we got the GST. As Joe says, we got to, unfortunately, move on. We've got a tough master of ceremonies here tonight, and I want to move to something and someone that I think will be of interest to you. Because as Richard Gwynne has persuasively and elegantly established, Canada's greatest Prime Minister by far was Sir John A. Macdonald. He died in 1891. No more eloquent tribute to Macdonald was ever spoken than that delivered to a hushed House of Commons by his legendary Liberal opponent, Sir Wilfrid Laurier. Laurier said that when considering the supreme art of governing men, that Sir John was gifted as few men in any land or any age were ever gifted. All Prime Ministers of Canada, including all of the remarkable people who were with you earlier tonight, all of us have followed and stood in Macdonald's shadow. Like the giants of the world stage, Sir John thought big and long-term. Depend on it, he once said. The long game is the true one. All prime ministers encounter challenge, moments of sorrow and sadness and defeat. But consider the situation Macdonald had to deal with at the end of celebrations on July 1, 1867. Once the Governor-General returned to Rideau Hall and the revelers grew quiet, Macdonald faced a situation the next morning that would have completely intimidated, if not destroyed, lesser men. The nation he had formed with his courage and bare hands had fewer than 4 million citizens. The great republic to the south had 10 score more, and Canadians were divided by region and race and religion. Our governing structures were new, and the rookie prime minister had, in fact, to invent many of them on the fly every day. Most alarmingly, the Grand Army of the Potomac that had marched through Georgia under Sherman and defeated Lee at Gettysburg was still under arms. Due to British support of Confederate raiders during the just completed U.S. Civil War, and with stirrings of manifest destiny on the lips of many important U.S. leaders, prospects for this new union, fragile union, of 4 Canadian provinces, so tiny in comparison, and hugging the U.S. border, the prospects were bleak. Between Ontario and the Pacific lay the vast emptiness of Rupert's Land, coveted by many Americans and all but forgotten by the offices of Whitehall in London. And who was this John Macdonald who faced these challenges that day without hesitation? Well, he was a Kingston lawyer who had entered politics at the age 29. His first wife had died a slow and lingering death, finally succumbing to a mysterious and debilitating illness at Christmas, just a decade before Confederation. He and his wife had lost a child. As a boy, Macdonald had watched his own brother beaten to death by a drunken man on the streets of Kingston. As an adult, and like his father before him, this immigrant from afar faced a lifelong battle with alcohol. And after Confederation, he and his second wife, Agnes, would be forced to watch helplessly as their beloved only child, Mary, was stricken with hydrocephalus. But in that first term in office, Macdonald moved quickly. Though Canada couldn't afford it, Sir John A.'s government purchased Rupert's Land. He then promised British Columbia a 3,000-mile band of steel, the CPR, if they entered Confederation, and then, by God, he proceeded to build it. Only 7 years after the celebrations of July 1, 1867, Macdonald was removed from office and crushed, absolutely crushed, by the Liberals in the next election. In 1878, the same Canadians who had tossed him out of office returned him to power with a majority. Through the years of blistering personal attacks, unremitting and cruel media criticism, allegations of scandal, and periods of deep family sorrow, he never looked back. He never whined. He never quit. He was a leader. He fought his last campaign during the winter of 1891. The crowds who gathered before him sensed that every appearance might be his last. Sir John, you'll never die, they shouted. And how right they were. When Macdonald's weary body finally gave out, shortly after that last victory, a nation mourned. Despite his trials and tribulations, his mistakes and failures, both human and political, Canada, Macdonald's Canada, was a transcontinental nation that truly stretched from sea to shining sea. The 4 provinces that he had brilliantly persuaded to come together in 1867 under his guidance were now 7, and the groundwork had been laid for one of the world's most magnificent and successful nations, our beloved Canada. As a Canadian columnist recently wrote, it is one thing for a leader to aspire high and fail. It is another for a leader to aim low and succeed. He might temporarily triumph, but the country loses. Well, Macdonald aimed for the skies, and he won. And every single Canadian for the 145 years since has been the direct beneficiary of the vision and the courage of Sir John A. Macdonald, who built this country with his bare hands. But even a prime minister as great as Macdonald didn't accomplish this all alone. In order for a prime minister to do big things for Canada, he or she must have a strong and able cabinet from all parts of the country in place. A diverse and talented group of MPs in caucus and senators, ensuring that the voices of all Canadians are heard in the national caucus room is also required. And the third requirement, and by no means the least, is that a prime minister must draw men and women from the public service to the national agenda. In policy development, implementation of government priorities, and most of all, in ensuring at all times that a prime minister receives honest and unvarnished advice, irrespective of the sensitivities of the files before him and the complexity of the international negotiation that is at hand. These unsung heroes of the government are more than essential. They also ensure, the public service also ensures that the best ideas from business and labor and our great universities also find their way to the Prime Minister's desk for ultimate consideration in policies around the cabinet table. Successful prime ministers dating back to Sir John himself have worked closely and effectively with the public service. In the 1880s, our first prime minister turned to a young man in the public service of Canada to assist him. His name was Joseph Pope. In inviting Pope to join his office, Sir John said to this bright young find from the Department of the Interior, as it was then called, quote, "Come down to Earnscliffe tomorrow morning. You're going to have plenty to do. And by the way, remember, I shall require all of your time." History also records that upon taking office years later, Laurier ensured that Joseph Pope was there by his side. Thus began the strictly nonpartisan nature of the Canadian public service, one of the most admired in the world, which provides skilled, thoughtful, and highly competent advice and counsel to whichever political party has gained the confidence of the Canadian people and has been elected to form a national government. I say to you all, and to anyone in another city who cares to listen, that this important dimension of our citizenship, honored and unsullied, must remain that way as a vital and indispensable part of our collective governance. In my day, brilliant public servants like Derek Burney and Paul Tellier and Marc Lortie and Paul Heindecker and Bob Fowler and countless others from the public service answered the same call. As Prime Minister of Canada for 9 years, I benefited directly and daily, as did my government, from their remarkable talents. But much more importantly, Canada benefited every day that they held office in the public service of Canada.